Attention everybody. The views and opinions expressed on the show are not necessarily those of Acts Ministry, Acts Media Group, and or their affiliate and supported ministries and or nonprofits. He's here today. He's going to talk to somebody that was an FBI agent. It's going to be real exciting. Here he is, Crime Time with Dr. Steve Albrecht. Take it away, Steve.
Thanks, Producer Matt and Producer Jay. Welcome to Crime Time. This is Crime Time Podcast Episode 62. I'm Dr. Steve Albrecht, joining you from the Acts Media Group studios in Springfield, Missouri. For this hour, I'll be talking with Chris Holland, a retired FBI agent and former Missouri police officer. He's had an interesting career working both here and in Africa and in the Middle East. He's the founder of Holland Felony Analysis, an expert witness consulting firm that serves attorneys in criminal and civil cases around the country. Chris has served as a senior advisor to the Afghan Major Crimes Task Force and for 3 years worked daily with the Liberia National Police Commissioner for criminal investigations. The UN Police Commissioner for Liberia appointed him a special liaison to a board of inquiry initiated by the President of Liberia to investigate police malfeasance. As a civilian, he has consulted on cases of police bias or failure of due diligence in both criminal and civil arenas. He's a former adjunct faculty for George Washington University and at present serves as adjunct faculty for Southwest Baptist University. In 2014, he established his private consulting business, providing training in the conducting of interviews and interrogations and case analysis to identify bias, failure of due diligence, and malfeasance, resulting in wrongful convictions and cold cases. So the man knows his stuff. So thanks for listening to Crime Time, where we talk about crime and crooks and cops and personal security. We'll talk about some dangerous people and lots of heroes. We'll even mention a few stupid crooks. Most importantly, I'll talk to you about what you can do to keep yourself and your family safe from crime and violence. As always, you need to be vigilant at home, in your neighborhood, at work, and in school, and even on the road. This show exists to make you feel more empowered, more secure, and more educated on security issues and the criminal justice system. As background, I worked for the San Diego Police Department for 15 years as a patrol officer and then a reserve sergeant and a domestic violence investigator. I now work as a training consultant and teach training workshops focusing on human resources, employee coaching, workplace violence prevention, school violence, library security, and security issues in the workplace. I've written 24 books on business, workplace violence, police subjects, and guns, all of which you can find on Amazon. My 3 gun books are available on Amazon Kindle. You can always reach me at my website, crimetimeradio.com. Send me an email, connect with me on LinkedIn at Dr. Steve Albrecht, and follow me on Twitter at Dr. Steve Albrecht. You can find past episodes of the show on SoundCloud, which I post every Tuesday, and you can watch new ones every Tuesday live at this hour. So, Chris, welcome to the show. Thanks for coming on.
Thanks, Steve. Glad to be here.
So you look at being an FBI agent, and there's so much history with the Bureau, founded in the 1920s or so, right around there, and J. Edgar Hoover and the movies and TV. And I think what a lot of people don't realize is there's a fair amount of complexity to getting the job, and becoming an FBI agent requires a college degree, and oftentimes in this day and age it requires a college degree in a certain subjects. So I know after 9/11 they really put a focus on linguistics and chemistry and accounting and things like that. So tell us what the process is to becoming an FBI agent.
Well, after 9/11, the emphasis on recruiting switched to a lot of hard sciences, computer sciences, and intelligence-related fields. So the process, you can find that at www.fbi.gov. All the information there to apply is online. And the process has been streamlined. It used to take maybe up to 2 years from the time you would apply before you would get through. But there was a lot of attrition from applicants because of that time factor. So it finally got switched. And after 9/11, they made a great emphasis to get that streamlined so that now about a year from the time you apply, you'll get in if you make the cut. But the process is about fivefold. One, of course, is the application, which deters a lot of people because the SF-111 is a long document to get done, and you have to keep track of a lot of records in your life to be able to complete it. But that's really the biggest hurdle. Once it's in, it goes into a pool. You'll get tested. You'll have to hit a certain score to be considered. And then there's processes. You'll go through a background investigation, which they'll go deep into your background.
And what's the written test like?
It's changed a lot, but it's like a typical government test. It'll hit on mathematics, science, engineering, philosophy. There's a very large psychological profile to it. If anyone's taken any test for any type of a government job, it's pretty standard in that sense. If you get past the test, you'll get a score. You'll make a cutoff. If you make that cutoff, you'll get a background done. If you pass the background, they'll bring you in. You'll do a physical. All this gets done now out of Washington, D.C. It used to be done out in the field offices. But again, after 9/11, there was an effort to standardize things much more. So it was all brought into Washington, D.C. Standardization because of accountability, obviously. And if you make the cut and you get past all that, in about a year, you'll get to Quantico.
So is there a physical abilities test too as well? I mean,
sure. Oh yeah. Basically, it's running a mile. Actually, it's running 2 miles, push-ups, pull-ups. Your standard type of a test, agility test, obstacle course. Right.
And the age range is 21 to 42 that you can apply, right around there, 21 to 40?
21, actually 37 is a cutoff.
37, okay.
57 is mandatory retirement. And once you hit 57, you can apply for year-to-year extensions. But it's 57 because you have to be 20 years in. So minimum, or the max age is 37 because maximum retirement is, or minimum retirement is 57. So it gets you 20 in for retirement.
So people that get the extensions, is it based on expertise that they have that the Bureau wants to continue to use, or?
What's called the needs of the Bureau. Everything that happens is done with the needs of the Bureau. Where you're assigned, what office you go to, what you do, needs of the Bureau.
Right.
So if you're filling a need in that particular office, sure, you'll get it.
So polygraph examination
yes,
as well? Okay.
Right. You take a polygraph in the process.
So background check, written test, physical abilities test, polygraph test, and then also sort of some sort of interview process that.
Right. You'll go through an interview. You'll sit down with a board of agents, and they have a set of questions they're going to go through with you, and then they're going to score you and your ability to respond.
Yeah. And those questions are, I think one of the things that people get sort of confused or hung up on when they're applying for those jobs is sometimes there's no perfect answers for those questions. They're scenario based. They're trying to see how you think on your feet, how you think under stress, whether you're giving answers which are within policy, within the law, stuff like that.
Exactly. It's the number one, as you hit, it's your ability to think on your feet, because you don't know what they're going to ask you. And they could ask you what a street in Seattle is named after, for example, or St. Louis, where I'm from. But your ability to answer a question on your feet. If you don't know an answer, how well do you dance with it, or you say, I don't know the answer?
Right.
Do you have a sense of humor? People want to see people able to laugh under stress. Okay, this is an important thing. But you'll be asked other questions. You'll be asked, what's your biggest achievement in life? So if I asked you that right now, what would you say?
Being here today, getting here today.
Okay, and I might say surviving my career.
Yeah.
But you'd be asked a question like that. So what do you answer?
My daughter would be my biggest achievement, my happiest achievement.
All right, yeah. All right. I'll run with that too.
So
okay.
So it reminds me. A friend of mine worked for Microsoft, and one of the questions they asked people in Microsoft back in the day when they were hiring was, "How many best friends do you have?" And so the answer is one. That's what a best friend is, right? So it's not, everybody loves me. I have 50 people, or I don't have any best friends because I'm a serial killer and no one likes me. So the answer they're looking for is one, and I have someone who I consider to be my best friend. I thought that was an interesting question. I always I do a lot of panel interviews and for government hiring, and one of the questions that a colleague of mine started asking, which I thought was genius, was to all the applicants, tell us, assume that you have the job, assume you've been hired, tell us what we do here. And the second question related to that is, assume you've got the job, tell somebody else what you do here. And it's baffling to me how people go, well, I think we do something with it, and they don't know. They're applying for a job, they don't know what the company does, or they don't know what their particular job does.
Right.
They may have read the descriptions and all that. So you would say, I better be studied up on what the FBI does as a business, as an entity in the federal government, and what their history is. That stuff would help, right?
Believe it or not, you'll actually get people applying, coming in, and not even realize that they're going to have to carry a gun. Something that basic, yeah.
Right.
But they won't have a basic understanding of how the FBI functions, how they get the job done.
So when you get through the process, and then you go to the academy in Quantico, Virginia, how long is the academy?
16, now it's about 20 weeks.
And so you live there?
Yes, it's set up very much like a university, if you will. You have dorms. Your dorms look just like a dorm room. The rooms you stay in, you'll have a roommate, and you'll share a bath or whatever you call Jack and Jill shower, if you will. Yep. With the next one. The classrooms, everything is connected by, we should call them the gerbil walks, glassed in, so once you're inside during the winter time, you're not out. But everything there is modern and up to date as it can possibly be. The classrooms have all the latest electronics in them. Everything's self-contained. The food's pretty good. Olympic-sized swimming pool, gymnasium. It's really a pretty good place to be. If you're going to spend a few months away. It's a good experience.
Well, they run about 4-year academies or so?
It'll vary by, again, the needs of the Bureau.
Yeah.
When I was hired, they hired exactly 315 agents that year. And it will depend on how many people they need to run. And the things obviously get scheduled out years in advance based upon retirements and what they anticipate.
So one of the other things I don't think people know is there's something exists called the FBI National Academy, which they typically send police, lieutenants, captains, commanders, assistant chiefs, and chiefs through. So that it's quite an honor to be put into the program. It's a decoration that a lot of people put on their resumes and in their career history. So talk about the FBI National Academy.
Yeah, the National Academy, that was started by Hoover. Hoover, for all the people like to make cracks about him, was he homosexual? And I guess the big thing was that he wore women's dresses deal. The guy was incredibly bright and a forethinker in how he organized things. And the National Academy was, and it still is, a way that they bring, as you said, staff officers in from sheriff's departments and police come in there to train. And they're there for what is the equivalent of a college semester. And they get college credits from the University of Virginia out of it when they leave. But the point there was to bring them in. They get training in a variety of topics, and it's just like, again, there's college. There's a number of courses, and you pick what your curriculum is going to be. And the purpose of that was to build that relationship between the FBI and state and local law enforcement. That was the genius behind it. And it is, as you say, it is a badge of honor to have gone there. And if you deal with any officers who've been there, they'll usually have that as part of their letterhead or their salutation, whatever, their signature block, and it will say NAC, whatever the class number was. That's how you're identified by your class number, and they're very, very proud of that. Yeah,
the in the examples I've seen, when I was with San Diego PD, is they would send captains and assistant chiefs to that because, they anticipated you're going to be a chief somewhere else, either in our agency or another agency, and lots of people that I know that went up through the ranks, went through that, became a chief in another California city, which is a great sort of way to grow the field. And
exactly,
it's sort of like you watch professional football and you say who studied under Andy Reid, who studied under Bill Belichick, and where's the tree of coaching tree of those guys, and where they ended up as head coaches. And so I always thought the FBI National Academy was pretty impressive. One of the things that's at the FBI building is the behavioral analysis unit. So they have BA1 and BAU 1 and 2, I think it is.
Right.
And so they're kind of broken up based on what they do. I think BAU 2 is the one where my friend Andre Simmons worked, where it was focusing on school violence and workplace violence and mass shootings and things like that. So talk about the BAU set up there.
Well, it was started several decades ago, and it grew out of a lot of existing programs from the psychiatrist in Brussels that you knew in Boston that profiled the Boston Strangler, a gentleman named Howard Teeton who studied under Paul Crook, I believe a criminologist in California. So it's developed just like you see if people watch Mindhunter on Netflix.
Right.
That's a pretty good representation of how things began, and they went out and did the interviews in the prisons, etc., to learn about serial killers, which was the original focus. You add into that the VICAP, which we were talking about yesterday, the Violent Offender Apprehension Program.
Yeah, so VICAP stands for Violent Criminal Apprehension Program, and it is and first of all, let me back up, there are 57 field offices, 58?
Might be 59 now. I have to stop and count.
59 FBI field offices, and every FBI field office, as I recall, has a VICAP coordinator.
Yes.
And so VICAP was a program started in the late 70s. Does that sound about right?
Yep.
So this was before we had computer databases. Now that we can find a needle in a haystack with the computer database.
Right.
But the original function of VICAP, at least as I know it from my understanding, I want you to clarify, is that it was really designed to gather as much suspect crime scene data about serious homicides, sexual assaults, and child kidnappings and things like that as a way to say, what are the commonalities of these perpetrators we can gather?
It was a database to collect information, looking for commonalities so that they could link a case from Massachusetts to one in Indiana, for example. Do we have enough commonalities in these crimes that we can link one to the other, maybe think that the same perpetrator did them? That was the original idea, and it still is. But what happened then, of course, is when the BAU came into being, the two things merged because the VICAP collects information and BAU provides an analytical process for that. So the BAU, they support, as you say, each field office has a coordinator there. So if a Springfield PD needed to profile them, like they did on the three missing women case from from almost 30 years ago now, for example. So they would this is part of the Kansas City division. So they would contact the VICAP coordinator in Kansas City. They would set up the process to get a profile done. And then the profile itself is based upon a lengthy document that police provide, pages and pages long of minutia. And they will go and then they will prepare a profile from that. And it'll be based upon the crime scene, whatever forensic evidence was available. Photographs, witness statements, anything that can possibly be brought into bear to try and create a picture of what happened that night and who might possibly have done it.
And including suspects that they've already interviewed and
yes,
possible people that are on their list of...
It can redirect you back into one. There's several cases where suspects had been interviewed, had been passed on, and then the profile they've looked at and said, gee, I think we've already run across this guy.
Right.
And they've gone back and re-interviewed him, and bingo, they got the guy.
So we look at the serial killer sort of modality is for some of these perpetrators, it's movement. It's, they live in one city and they engage in their crimes, and they move to another city and they engage in the same crimes. We've seen the truck driver serial killer happen with, some of these guys, the Green River Killer and guys like that. So there's a mobility there which says these guys are going to replicate their crimes in other locations.
There's travelers. Israel Keys is one of the most famous of them, who actually would go to areas prior to the killings, and he would have his abduction kits made up. And they would be there, and as he traveled from place to place, he had his kit already available, and he would go out and make the snatch. So VICAP, if you have these occurring across the country, then VICAP becomes an area where they collect those various murder books, if you will. They get all that information in, and they can start to develop a profile on someone like Keys, who travels from place to place. Right.
So homicide keeps a murder book. It's the notebook, the physical thing that has the photographs, the crime scene, the sketches, the interviews, all that stuff. And so you look at one of the powers of the FBI, which is they can multiply those resources across all 50 states. And so a small PD says, this is what's happening in our area, sheriff's department. They can really maximize
what the FBI can do at any given time and place, if the situation warrants, is it can literally bring 10,000 agents to focus on a thing, if that's what needs to be done, and it can happen in literally in a matter of hours.
Like a bombing, something like that.
A bombing. Yeah. The mirror building blew up in Oklahoma City, and within a day you had 5,000 agents across the country following leads on that.
Yeah.
They can generate a tremendous amount of information very quickly.
Just to talk about the mirror building, the Oklahoma City McVeigh, I crossed the country with my partner from California. He was moving to Kentucky, and my car partner from the PD, and we stopped there. And I couldn't go inside the actual museum. It was too painful. Mm-hmm. And we walked around and you see these chairs, which are symbolic of the death, and then you see these little tiny chairs, which are children who died, largest case of pediatric homicide in the history of the United States. So we're looking at these little chairs, and they're lit up, and I was in tears. I couldn't go inside the building. We were looking at photographs of people that went to work and dropped off their children at the daycare, and then were both killed, the parents and the child. And I don't know whether gloss over is the right word, but as a nation, we put that to bed, just like we put other horrible things like the Boston Marathon bombing and the first World Trade Center bombing in '93, and then 9/11. And those things exist, and it's just such a powerful reminder. I did a conference about a year after that on workplace violence, and we had one of the speakers was a major from the Oklahoma City Fire Department, and he said when he was standing at the scene of the bombing, as soon as it was stable, he could hear the building creak because it was so damaged, and he said when he would go into his house and open a door and it would creak, or he'd open the dishwasher and it would creak, it would take him right back to that time. He said it was horrible. And so, look at the one small cadre of horrible guys can do that amount of damage in our country. Look like, the 9/11 hijackers of 16, 17 of these guys can do that much damage in our country. And, evil exists in the world. And so, that's why we go back to this idea of, you and I have been talking about how the challenges in law enforcement, and talk about it too in your career. You started out as a street cop in Missouri, but decided to go into the FBI. What was the motivation?
Just ready to go on. I'd been a cop for 5 years. I just finished graduate school and was ready for another challenge. And I picked the phone up and called the Marshal Service, and no one answered the phone. So I called the FBI, and they answered. And I got an application. It actually took me, I think, about 9 months
Yeah.
10 months to get through.
So the movement into the FBI. I mean, people have to have a college degree, right? I mean, you need one. Now, unless you're a Pashtun speaker or an Arabic speaker or something, they can maybe make exceptions.
No, you can get hired not as an agent though.
Yeah.
Back the image always was of the accountant, the attorney deal. But even back under Hoover, that was not the case. There were lots of guys, especially during the 30s, with the new era of the automobile and the Tommy gun. A lot of cops, especially got a lot of guys out of Texas and Oklahoma,
right?
Because they were quote unquote manhunters,
right?
And they were hired. And that never changed. And I was a cop. Obviously, I didn't have a specialty degree or anything to get in. But what they would do is within their recruiting. Well, let's say not recruiting, but the hiring process, they would look for a certain number of attorneys, a certain number of accountants, and then they had what was called a generalist, which was me.
Yeah. Chemists, they like to.
Well, that would be that. Excuse me. Yeah, that was always there. The hard sciences, and as I said, that went up after 9/11, became even more so because we've become so much more technologically oriented, plus the threat of weapons of mass destruction.
Right.
So you have to have people that are more versed in dealing with those issues.
So I think there's more than two BAUs, behavioral analysis units.
You know what? I haven't looked. I couldn't tell you.
So I think one of them focuses on terrorism.
There is a terrorist group, right?
And then I know the BAU2 was really looking at school violence and workplace violence and mass attacks, and they would get agents, men and women on the ground right after these mass shootings at these schools, and then in Las Vegas shooting and things like that. And so one of the things, in my work in workplace violence prevention, the sort of Bibles for our work is the work that's created by the Secret Service and the work that's created by the FBI. They come out with really, really solid reports, which are well researched, based on their being at the scene of these incidents, talking to these perpetrators if they survive, talking to the victims, doing an analysis of what happened. And they write reports that guys like me can read and turn into training materials and things. So the Secret Service has a National Threat Assessment Center, and they've been talking to assassins, people that shoot public figures since 1865 forward. And the FBI is so good at getting out to these scenes right when these things happen, gathering this data. And so if you are in my work, if you're looking at how you look at how these perpetrators operate and believe, these the work's been done for us in terms of the investigations and the analysis, and that part's very, very useful to me. So we in my work, we talk about the FBI reports, the Secret Service reports, work that was done by the U.S. Marshal Service because they protect federal judges, and that stuff's been really quite a structure for my career to say, I'm going to learn from the best in terms of what they've been doing. If you think about, if you think about the law enforcement as a career, you and I have talked about the challenges that exist now based on when you and I did the work, and this sense of lack of respect for law enforcement. I still think people, the vast majority of this country, believe in law enforcement and believe we need to have it and believe we need to have federal, local, and state law enforcement. But there's just a small cadre of people that are, the ones that make the news. But I still think most people like cops.
Oh, I know. I would agree with you. And when the whole defund the police movement was at its zenith, they had far more people saying wrong, especially in minority neighborhoods where the police are so needed. We're coming out and telling these people, you're nuts. We need more cops. We don't need less. Right. They happen everywhere. In Chicago, happen in Seattle.
Baltimore, where I'm from.
Right. Yep. All these places. They all said exactly the opposite. So, no, I agree with you. And I think in so many areas, I think a lot of the country is much more conservative than it lets on about certain issues, and I think law enforcement's one of them. Yeah.
So we all watch TV. There's a sort of a cadre of shows which have always existed. There's lawyer shows, there's hospital shows, there's sitcoms, and then there's cop stuff. And so there's not a lot of cop and patrol shows. Adam 12 was one that influenced my life.
I grew up on that one.
But you look at how the FBI has been portrayed on TV and the FBI portrayed in movies, and cop movies, and I mean that's a staple in our it's been that way since the 30s. I mean that's been a staple, and so I think one of the things that people. And I know you and I have talked about this, how juries have an expectation that what they've seen in movies and on TV in terms of forensic analysis and forensic evidence and DNA and things like that, they can just put a guy's, a fingertip, partial fingerprint from his, left pinky into the database, and his face is going to pop up, and then they see his address and they drive over and pick him up. So what do you think, sort of good or bad, about the Hollywood TV relationship with the FBI, with law enforcement in general, how we sort of, came to the point where it's such a staple in our entertainment?
It's a staple of our entertainment, or how it is that they portray them. again, this goes back to Hoover. Hoover was a master of promotion, and so if you go back, for myself, I got interested in the FBI watching Jimmy Stewart in the FBI Story,
right.
and its iconic portrayal of the FBI, which Hoover was very much behind that and behind Jimmy Stewart being the lead in it. But if you remember back in the 60s, the FBI with Ephraim Zimbalist Jr. was on Sundays, brought to you by Ford.
Yep.
So those were all products of Hoover working very closely with Hollywood to promote those things, and they were all very, very positive images. But now we're inundated with. In fact, I just saw this morning there's a new show coming out with from Silence of Clarice. What was her name? Clarice Starling.
Oh, yeah,
there's going to be a new
right.
show with that's the main
Right.
character in it.
Right.
But Hollywood did most of it wrong because I don't think there's that cooperation directly with the FBI, for example, anymore.
Yeah.
And
What about the TV show called FBI that's just coming out now?
I've never watched it.
Yeah, and then there's the Criminal Minds.
I've watched that probably twice.
Yeah.
And it's because they're to me they're just not very good shows.
Yeah.
And I don't want to make someone not watch the show just because I don't care for it, but I don't find them very captivating myself.
So besides
On that note, let me change it. So you said about Patricia. If you've ever watched the show Southland, did you ever see that? I think it's on Hulu now.
Oh yeah, that was a LAPD based. Yeah, LAPD.
Probably the best cop show that's ever been on television.
I think I watched one episode and it sort of frightened me because it was too realistic and it made me uncomfortable thinking about the days of patrol.
It was great.
Yeah.
It was absolutely great.
Yeah. So you look at how if you look at crime stories in patrol was not typically covered because it's pretty boring, right?
Right.
It's traffic stops and
domestics
and burglary reports. But
Right.
so it's usually around organized crime. It's around serial killing and that kind of stuff. That's what they're really all about. I mean, I remember I had read Thomas Harris's book, Silence of the Lambs, and it was a pretty scary book. And then you watch that, portrayal of
Buffalo Bob, Buffalo Bill.
Yeah, Buffalo Bill. You watch that portrayal, and you watch. And why is the actress's name escaping me?
It was not Clarice.
Yeah,
Jodie Foster.
You watch Jodie Foster's
Jodie
portrayal
Foster.
of that, and there was a scene in the end of the movie where he puts on night vision goggles and he cuts the power inside the building, and she can't see and he can. That was terrifying,
Right.
and it was absolutely terrifying. So Hollywood gets it right in certain movies. I mean, you and I talk about Goodfellas is one of my favorite. I liked Donnie Brasco with Pacino and Johnny Depp. I thought Johnny Depp did a very nuanced performance in that movie, and that whole sense of that true story of Donnie Brasco and what he had done. Talk about that if you remember what.
I thought Al Pacino was was really good in that, all the way to the end. I don't know if you remember this when Pacino's getting called to come meet some people, and he takes off his
jewelry
jewelry
exactly.
because he knows it's a one-way trip.
Yep.
But I thought of all the ones I've seen, Goodfellas was probably the most spot on in terms of how organized crime operates and what they do. Right.
And so there's sort of a heyday of organized crime. It was in the Prohibition and the Capone and era, and then it sort of ebbed and flowed. We saw the movement into Las Vegas and that kind of stuff, allegedly with Frank Sinatra's friends.
Right.
And Chicago was an area where you worked, and so you worked, and you said in your bureau days you worked in Charlotte, and you worked in Chicago.
I was in Chicago 8 years.
And then you think about sort of New York as the hub for organized crime. And I mean, talk about what those guys do. I mean, it's money laundering, it's prostitution, it's stolen goods, it's drugs, it's everything. I mean, they got their hands in a lot of pies.
It is everything. Gambling, illegal gambling is a big one. It's in everything, and it varies a little bit. In Chicago, a lot of control of unions. Chicago is an incredibly union city, so there's a lot of control there.
New York too.
Right,
Yep.
and so in Chicago, just as an example, we don't have what they call families. We had what we call crews, 5 crews, and the city was divided geographically between the north side and the south side, and crews pretty much operated exclusively in their given areas, and it would be across the board, as you said, gambling, prostitution, whatever. The big change in all that since about 1990, of course, was the fall of the Berlin Wall came down, the USSR dissolved, and so what happened then was you had all the Eastern European and the Russian organized crime came in. So the field's become much more diversified in the last 30 years than what we usually did. As prior to that time, if you said organized crime, you thought the Italian Mafia, the Costa Nostra, the Sicilian Mafia, which is different, which we had a big presence for that in Chicago, but those were the main players. But in the 90s, of course, you had coming out of L.A., Bloods and Crips,
Right.
the black gangs,
Right.
and then, of course, MS-13. But then in 1990, it all just began to cascade with the fall of the USSR.
So you look at one of the themes in Goodfellas is they didn't really get into drugs until about the 70s, and there was a whole scene with Paulie and Ray Liotta's character. He doesn't want him to get involved in drugs.
Right.
So you look at the arrival of crack cocaine into the inner city neighborhoods and the movement. I mean, there's always had drugs, but I remember from my time in the 80s, it was the cocaine cowboys, and when I worked in San Diego on the border, I mean, it was Wild West days. I mean, there were shootouts all the time. There were port runners, and I remember thinking about how long it took the Border Patrol and Customs to put barriers that you had to drive around,
Right.
concrete barriers.
Right.
I'm like, I worked down there for years, and it was just guys crashing through the port, coming both sides to smuggle people or drugs, back and forth. So you look at how the drug trade really. I think there was, correct me if I'm wrong, there's sort of an honor amongst the mafia. We don't mess around with drugs, with everything else. But then drugs became so lucrative, they said, we're going to sell as much drugs as everybody else.
So much money. Yeah, there's too much money involved with it. And it began with heroin. After World War II, that's when they really got into drug trafficking, because during World War II, you had the connections out of Sicily. And that's where it began with Lucky Luciano. Okay, because Lucky Luciano was engaged in World War II to fight the Nazis, and had organized crime, helping the FBI in the United States, watching for saboteurs, etc. But that was the connection. Was right after World War II. The heroin started coming, transported by Sicilians, who were the original ones involved in the Sicilian organized crime, and then it branched out into the mafiosos, if you will,
right.
Cosa Nostra.
And then you look at just the cocaine, 80s rush. It came in through Miami and Los
Right.
Angeles and Texas and everywhere, and
Right.
just inundated this country. I remember talking to a guy who was a Hollywood producer, and he said, back in those times, we decided, could we make more money making a movie, or could we make more money selling cocaine? That was sort of our deciding, in some of these production companies. We can make more money selling cocaine. Why make a movie?
Oh yeah. You get the cocaine flow was incredible. We used to, in Chicago, I would say we did it every week, but a lot of times, we would take down literally trailer loads at a time of cocaine that came out of Mexico through Texas.
Right.
And there was a regular pipeline flow, and
So you have a John Gotti or a John Gotti Jr. story for us?
met Gotti one time. He was here at the federal prison hospital.
Senior.
Yes, and I had throat cancer at the time, which is why he was here at the medical facility, and his son had to come out, and his son was under indictment in New York. So his son came out to talk to Daddy about whether or not he should take the plea, and I personally thought John Gotti was about repugnant. Just I watched my language.
Senior.
Yes.
Yeah.
But Senior was just a.
I mean, how many murders could you think they tied to the guy? 2 dozens? I mean,
I don't know. Well, how many did Sammy the Bull Bravano kill?
Right.
Alone. And I think he was, like 19 or 20 by himself, if I
Because
remember right.
You want a little piece of trivia here? Sammy the Bull Gravano, a Gotti henchman, has his own podcast.
I thought he was in prison.
My dad just sent me the link for his new podcast. He's out of prison. Yeah, he's got his own podcast. So
Right.
so
Well-
the world has officially ended because now everybody has a podcast, including him.
There's nothing. Yeah, Sammy, for those who don't know, he testified against Gotti and went into witness protection program. Then he ended up in jail again because he got involved in selling meth.
Right.
But I got Gotti because the son came down here, wanted to talk to Dad, and then we had to videotape the meeting. We weren't allowed to be in the room, but we had a live video stream of the meeting.
Right.
And that was my encounter with.
So you met both of those
John.
guys.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, tell me the handshake story.
Real charmers.
Yeah, tell me.
Gotti had never in his life shaken hands with an FBI agent. And when we went in, the warden introduced us before he said I was from the FBI. And so Gotti was like, well.
Rats. Yeah. Wish that hadn't happened. Yeah. So you never washed your hand again after shaking?
Oh, yeah,
hands?
I
Okay,
washed it pretty
okay,
quick.
That's good.
Yeah.
So you look at your evolution in terms of your work.
Yeah.
You've come, through local law enforcement into federal law enforcement, and you have a pretty broad brush. When you left the FBI, then you got involved with working overseas in specifically in Africa and in Afghanistan. So you're working as a contractor and doing support of police services over there. It's got to be pretty challenging to say our ethics and laws and codes and things are not nearly the same as they are in Afghanistan or in
You
Liberia.
think?
Right.
No, they don't. They're not on the same page at all.
Yep.
I was a senior advisor with the Afghan Major Crimes Task Force, which they were trying to develop as a quasi-FBI capability. We had about 300 people, if I remember right, that were brought in, not Afghans, 300 Afghans from their various agencies, one of which is like the CIA. So half these guys were like CIA spook types of guys. But they were brought in together to create this organization. And, yeah, it's a challenge. Everything you're dealing with is a challenge.
Right.
The corruption is incredible. You're trying to, you sit there and you're talking to a guy and you're talking about how you do an interview or you need some information. And the guy sits there, looks at you straight-faced and says, well, we go hanging from a chain on the wall and I start beating him until he talks. That was accepted. This is the way they'd always done business.
Right.
So trying to kind of change that mindset was a bit difficult. Now, I say that. Met some absolutely terrific Afghans there, guys that you love to work with that just really wanted to learn what you had to impart to them and to use it. But it's quite a challenge, and when people hear complain about things, they have no idea what they're talking about until they've been.
And so talk about
else.
Liberia. Where is that geographically in Africa?
It's on the west coast. As you look at the bulge of Africa, it's down on the south, the backside of that bulge, if you will, next to Sierra Leone, as we were talking about yesterday.
How do you get there?
You can't get there from here.
It's a slow boat.
Yeah, no, you can fly. Monrovia is the capital. Monrovia has an airport, but Monrovia you can't land on instruments at the airport there. And we had guys stuck about for a week in an adjacent city just because they couldn't make the 200-mile hop to land in there. But
so how do you get to Liberia from
wherever? You can fly straight out. You fly
from Germany or from
from Atlanta or New York.
Oh, okay.
You catch a. United or KLM, whoever, and they'll fly from here. You'd fly into Ghana, which is you'd land in Ghana. Straight flight to Ghana and then to Monrovia. It's a straight flight. There's no layover.
Only 20-something hours, probably, right?
Yeah, I'm trying to think about 22 hours. It's a long haul, and then you're not counting the time you've been sitting. If you're coming back, you might be sitting in the airport in Monrovia 4 or 5 hours. I made one trip. I think took about 30 hours to get home.
Wow.
Yeah.
So from there, when you came out, and then you said, I have such expertise. Talk about the work that you do in civil and criminal cases. You support attorney work. You support things that happen in the criminal court system. So you have a forensic practice now.
Well, not hard forensics, not hard science, obviously. But yeah, I work primarily for plaintiffs in civil matters, and I've worked for defense attorneys in ongoing criminal matters. So an expert witness is just basically someone that has more knowledge about something than the average person. I forget the exact definition of it, but so that you understand where that comes from. With the defense attorneys, it's usually a very specific thing they're looking for you to do. They know where there's a flaw in the case. And for me, one of the things I do is I analyze interviews. So a police interview, they sit down, do an interrogation, and I would watch the video and I go through and say, well, here's what happened, here's the technique that they used or didn't use, etc. And that's the kind of thing a defense attorney is looking for. One case in particular out of Seattle, Washington, they had a kid 18 years old on the autism spectrum, and they were trying to hang a first-degree murder case on a guy getting stabbed to death over an ounce of marijuana, if you can believe this. And so I think I had 6 interviews, including his, to look at, and the thing ended up getting bounced to 4 years for, I don't remember what the final charge was. Right. Because they had done really poor interviews on all of them. But
so for the civil side, oftentimes it's wrongful arrest,
wrongful
cases,
conviction,
wrongful conviction.
So when it gets to the point of a conviction, usually there's a lot of things that went wrong to get in there. So when it comes to something like that, my task then is sit down. I actually go through the entire investigation, beginning with the crime scene and what we call crime scene analysis, which actually is the starting point for behavioral analysis. You're looking at see what did the offender do at the crime, what did the victim do in the crime, and did the police understand it correctly? And then you start working with that. What's the forensic evidence support? What do the witnesses say? And you start tracking through that, and then you see what other witnesses came forward, what leads did they miss, etc. So that's what you get. That's what I get engaged to do. So what will happen is you'll start to find if it's wrongful conviction and it's a result of what we would say a failure of due diligence in the case, you'll see there's a pattern that will emerge as to what the investigators did or did not do, and that's what I'm looking for. And then ultimately, on some of the cases, you'll reach a point where you can actually prove not only was this a wrongful arrest, but the guy couldn't even have done it based upon what the circumstances are there. And when you get to that point, you've hit a home run.
So if I've ever done anything wrong, I want you to come in and throw cold water all over the prosecutor's case so I can get away. So just you and I have that worked out.
Okay.
So you can be found at hollandfelonyanalysis.com, correct?
That's correct.
That's 2 L's in Holland, and they can send you an email, anybody that's interested in hiring you for the civil or criminal cases. So, Chris, let's talk about our stupid crook of the week. We have 10 minutes left here. I want to thank you for everything that you give me. I want to get your take on this. Now, for my favorite part of the show, is Crime Time's Stupidest Crook of the Week. Here's where we get to talk about some of our dumbest criminals who managed to get themselves arrested based upon their monumental stupidity. A man in the state of Kansas was arrested for driving a stolen SUV to bail out his brother, who had been jailed only hours before for stealing a separate SUV. The first sibling caught was 36-year-old Eric Dean McCracken. He was arrested for driving a Chevy Trailblazer with a suspended license. Police then revealed that the SUV had been reported stolen. Hours later, his younger brother, Keith Ray McCracken, was arrested for leading deputies on a short chase in a stolen 2015 Chevy Alvarado that was also stolen. It is believed that the younger McCracken was en route to Jackson County Jail to post bail on his older brother in a stolen vehicle, the sheriff said. They were since reunited in jail. So drove a stolen vehicle to pick up your brother who had already been in jail for driving a stolen vehicle.
God bless stupid crooks.
Let's take our Crime Time IQ test here with this week's crime quiz question. Okay, Chris, here you go. I'm putting you on the spot here. Did you know that there is a U.S. Zoological Police Department? And I did not know this. There is a U.S. Zoological Police Department. Have you ever heard of this?
I did not know that, but I'm really not surprised.
The U.S. National Zoological Park police officers are specifically assigned and sworn to the National Zoo. And that's what they protect, the National Zoo in D.C. and the Smithsonian Conservation Biology Institute in Front Royal, Virginia. The National Zoological Park Police is one of the oldest police forces in the District of Columbia. According to the National Zoo website, the Zoological Police, man, look at the patches they must have. That's some long names. The Zoological Police was one of the original 5 police agencies in D.C. created in 1889. The 163-acre National Zoo is a Smithsonian facility in the District of Columbia and is staffed 24 hours a day by full-time U.S. National Zoological Park police officers. The National Zoo also maintains a 3,200-acre research facility called the Smithsonian Conservation Biology Institute in Front Royal, Virginia, which is staffed by members of the National Zoological Park Police. NZPP officers are federal law enforcement officers and carry full law enforcement jurisdiction within the District of Columbia and Virginia that work closely with Metropolitan D.C. cops and the U.S. Park Police, as well as other federal law enforcement agencies to include Virginia law enforcement. Who knew, right? So most people, back to your career again, most people that go through law enforcement, like the Secret Service has an academy in Beltsville, Maryland, and then a lot of people that go through federal law enforcement go through Glencoe, right. Georgia.
Flitzy,
right. The federal law enforcement training. So have you been down there?
No.
And that's, I would say, FBI's got its own training, Secret Service has its own training, but I think everybody goes, all the basic special agents go through Glencoe, don't they, before they get assigned to their specific agencies?
The FBI does not. The FBI, no.
What's that? So the FBI has its own.
Yeah, everything is
Secret Service has its own.
It's completely done at Quantico.
But all the other agencies like marshals and park police and all that, Capitol Police, they all go through.
I think they all go through FLETC,
right?
Federal Law Enforcement Academy, right?
So time for Crime Time safety tip. This week's tip falls into the category of life called just in case. So just in case you ever have your house tented for termite treatment, make sure that you literally move out anything that is valuable, rare, important, or stealable from your house before you let the pest control people tent it. This includes money, checkbooks, jewelry, guns, art, your important papers. Why? Because there are burglars out there, and I did a case about this once, who are just brave and dumb enough to risk going inside your house, even if it's full of life-threatening insecticide. They will risk their own death, typically by putting on sort of a half-assed hazmat suit and a breathing kit and cutting a hole or climbing under the tent and going into your house and stealing your stuff. I know it sounds amazing, but I know 2 homeowners who had this happen to them. You need to tell the extermination company to lock your entire house, doors and windows, during the tenting process just to make it harder for any potential burglars to get in. Use your phone to videotape the inside of the house while doing a walkthrough with the exterminator to show that you don't have any valuables inside. Sometimes the burglars are laborers hired by the exterminators just to put up the tents. Sometimes it is the crooked friend of the exterminator or the laborers he has hired, and sometimes it's just opportunistic burglars who are driving down the street and see an enormous tent over your house and think they can break in. Prepare for that possibility if you have to get your house tented. Can you imagine that? That you would risk breathing in insecticide to steal somebody's DVD player inside their house. I have had 2 cases where I've seen that happen.
Wear your COVID mask, man. I'm sure
that'll probably work, yeah. Or maybe just hold your breath like that Seinfeld episode and run in and get it and then run back out again. So thanks for listening to this episode of Crime Time. Thanks to Chris Holland, my guest, and his website again is at hollandfelonyanalysis.com. You can always send him an email and take a look at his CV and get a cut of what he does in terms of his expertise. I encourage you to go to my website at crimetimeradio.com. Send me an email with questions or topics you want me to cover on future shows. Connect with me on LinkedIn at Dr. Steve Albrecht. Follow me on Twitter at Dr. Steve Albrecht. As we come into the holidays, next week's show, I will talk about what I would do if I was a professional crook. That's our subject for next week. So in our world, there are sheep and shepherds and wolves. Too many people are sheep and too few people are shepherds. There are lots of wolves out there. There are not enough police officers or sheriff's deputies to protect us all, so you need to be a shepherd. Take care of yourself. Protect your family, your loved ones, your friends, and your coworkers. Pay attention and be prepared to defend yourself with legal force if necessary. Be a good witness for the police if you see a crime. Stay safe and alert and aware at home, at work, at school, and even on the road. So thanks for listening to Crime Time. My thanks to Jim Whining, producer Matt, producer Jay, and Chris Holland, and all the good folks at Axe Media Group. I'm Steve Albrecht. Thanks for listening to What I Know Is Right.